You believe you have a firm grasp on what time truly is. You strap a watch to your wrist. You sense the gradual process of aging within your own body. You hold memories of yesterday in your mind while simultaneously crafting plans for tomorrow. On the surface, time appears to be an obvious, undeniable aspect of existence. It presents itself as the most fundamental, natural phenomenon in the cosmos. However, that perception is not the reality of time. That is merely a perception, a clever biological illusion orchestrated by your neural architecture. The majority of people carry around a romanticized notion in their consciousness that time resembles a majestic river. You envision it flowing continuously, carrying you along its current from the domain of the past, through the fleeting moment of the present, and onward into the expanse of the future. You hold the conviction that time itself is in motion. Yet the fundamental flaw inherent in that poetic imagery is this. If we accept time as a river, we must then ask, at what velocity does this river travel? The answer always comes back as 1 second for every second that passes. That response is utterly devoid of meaning. It is logically equivalent to asserting that a table measures 1 table in length. Such a statement reveals absolutely zero insight into the true fabric of existence. The authentic reality is considerably more bizarre, considerably more like a precise mechanism, and to be perfectly honest, far less poetic than any image of a flowing current. Time does not move like a river. Time exerts no force to propel you forward, and if you maintain the belief that your comprehension of time's mechanics is solid simply because you can mentally tally the passing seconds, you are heading for a profoundly jarring confrontation with reality. Let us begin our exploration by examining the operations occurring within your skull, as this is precisely where the initial misunderstandings take root. You operate under the assumption that your mind's internal chronometer is a trustworthy and accurate device. This assumption is fundamentally incorrect. What you possess is a disorganized collection of interpretive systems. Let us contemplate a straightforward test. Make an attempt to mentally enumerate a duration of 60 seconds. Simply remain where you are and silently count 1, 2, 3. You believe you are successfully tracking the progression of time. In actuality, however, you are executing a highly specific and deeply personal internal program. For some individuals engaged in this counting exercise, there is an auditory component, a distinct inner voice. You are literally conducting a silent conversation with yourself, articulating each number beneath your breath as 1, 2, 3. If another person interrupts you and requests that you speak aloud, you instantly lose your place in the count. The internal mechanism seizes up and fails. However, and this is where the phenomenon becomes genuinely fascinating, there exists another category of people who do not experience any internal voice during this task. Instead, their experience is visual. They might perceive a mental image resembling a measuring tape marked with numerals, advancing past their mind's eye similar to ticker tape unspooling. It progresses with a distinct click, click, click. If you happen to utilize this particular visual tape measure system, you possess the ability to simultaneously read a newspaper or review a shopping list while maintaining your count of time. You could be organizing your socks, examining the patterns woven into their fabric, and all the while, that mental measuring tape continues its precise clicking in the background, completely undisturbed. Conversely, the person who relies on the internal vocal counting method finds it impossible to read even a single word without immediately forfeiting their temporal tally. This observation reveals something essential about our nature. That sensation you interpret as the forward movement of time is nothing more than a mental fabrication, a specific exercise in pattern recognition being performed by your brain. This experience differs dramatically from one individual to the next. It is not some universal, unchanging constant. It is, in essence, a biological hallucination. Consequently, when our discussion shifts to the domain of physics, when we aim to understand the cosmos, we must completely discard the subjective experiences of the human brain. We must cease our focus on how time feels and instead concentrate on determining what it actually is. Within the discipline of physics, we are compelled to adopt an operational approach. This means we refrain from posing questions about the fundamental essence of time. as that is a matter best left to philosophers who delight in such debates over their coffee. Instead, we ask a more practical question. What procedure do we use to measure it? And the answer we arrive at is almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. Time functions merely as a method for arranging events in a sequence. That constitutes its entire definition. It is essentially a system of labels. Picture yourself with a complete deck of playing cards. You proceed to arrange them in a linear sequence upon a table. You can then make the observation that the jack is positioned before the queen and the king comes after the queen. The cards themselves are not shifting positions. The table is not flowing in any direction. The established order is simply an inherent structural characteristic of how those specific cards have been placed. Time serves as the table. Events are the individual cards. When we speak of time passing, we are merely describing the act of reading the cards in order from the leftmost to the rightmost. This observation leads us directly to the single most significant error that nearly everyone commits. You conceptualize time as a kind of receptacle, a container. You imagine the entire universe as an enormous, empty chamber. And within this chamber, you picture time as a clock mounted on the wall, perpetually ticking away. Even if that chamber were completely vacant, you hold the belief that if we were to eliminate every star, every planet, every atom, and every photon of light, the clock of time would continue its endless rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. This perspective is mistaken. This represents the Newtonian conception of time, and it is a defunct model. Time does not function as a static backdrop against which events unfold. Time is fundamentally a quantification of alteration, of change. If, hypothetically, absolutely no change occurred anywhere within the universe, meaning no atomic vibrations, no movement of light, no transfer of energy, then time would effectively cease to exist. It would lose all meaning and definition. It is impossible to define a single second without referencing some physical process that marks its duration. This could be the swing of a pendulum, the oscillation of a quartz crystal, or the vibration of a cesium atom. Time is not a separate entity from the material content of the universe. Time is an intrinsic property belonging to that material. This is precisely the point where your intuitive understanding begins to resist. You might object, stating, "All right, but certainly time acts upon things. Time is the reason I grow older. Time is what causes milk to turn sour." This line of thinking is incorrect. It is a trap set by language. Time does not function as an active agent. Time does not possess physical appendages. It does not reach into your refrigerator and actively spoil your milk. That process is carried out by bacteria. It is performed by chemical interactions. It is dictated by the principle of entropy. Time is merely the accounting framework we utilize to monitor the velocity at which those specific reactions take place. To claim that time caused the milk to sour is logically equivalent to saying that inches constructed a house. Inches did not construct anything. Skilled carpenters did. Inches simply provide a measurement indicating where the walls are positioned. Time is the measuring tool, not the laborer performing the work. Let us extend this analogy of the measuring tool further, as it leads us into genuinely peculiar territory. If time is simply a ruler we employ to gauge the separation between events, what are the implications if that ruler itself proves to be flexible and pliable? This is not a concept borrowed from science fiction narratives. This is an empirically verifiable fact. Historically, we operated under the assumption that a second possessed identical duration everywhere in the cosmos. If you positioned a timepiece on Earth and another on Mars, it seemed intuitively obvious that they would tick in flawless synchronization. This assumption feels correct. It aligns with common sense, and it is entirely inaccurate. The pace at which clocks advance is contingent upon their location within a gravitational field and their velocity of motion. This is not due to any mechanical flaw within the clock itself. This is an elementary characteristic of how reality operates. Envision yourself operating an automobile across an enormous flat expanse of paper. You have the option to drive directly north, or you can drive directly east. If you choose to drive purely north, you are achieving maximum possible progress in the northward direction. However, if you rotate the steering wheel and begin traveling toward the northeast, You are now distributing your speed. You are advancing partially north and simultaneously partially east. Your rate of progress northward is reduced compared to before because you have allocated a portion of your motion to the eastward direction. Now, perform a conceptual substitution. Replace the northward direction with time and replace the eastward direction with space. This substitution encapsulates the core principle of relativity. You are perpetually in motion through the universe at a singular, constant speed. However, that total motion is divided or shared between movement through space and movement through time. If you remain perfectly stationary in your chair, you are allocating your entire motion quota to progressing through time. You are journeying toward the future at the maximum possible rate, which is 1 second per second. However, the instant you rise from your chair and begin walking, or board a rocket and accelerate away, you are redirecting some portion of that total motion into spatial movement. You are now in motion through space, and this mathematically necessitates, without exception, that your motion through time must decrease proportionally. Your clock will register time more slowly. Your biological aging process will decelerate. You are not causing any damage to the mechanism of the universe. You are simply altering your trajectory across the four-dimensional landscape. If it were theoretically possible for you to attain the speed of light, which represents the ultimate speed limit of the cosmos, you would be utilizing 100% of your motion for travel through space. Consequently, you would have zero motion remaining to allocate for travel through time. From the perspective of a photon, a particle of light, time does not elapse at all. It is simultaneously brought into existence and absorbed out of existence in a single, indivisible instant, according to its own frame of reference. From the photon's viewpoint, the entire universe is frozen in a static state. At this point, you might be reasoning to yourself, well, I certainly don't perceive my wristwatch slowing down whenever I sprint to catch a bus. This is obviously true. Your speed is insignificant in cosmic terms. You are, comparatively, a biological creature moving at a snail's pace. The relativistic effects are minuscule at the velocities typical of human activity, yet they are demonstrably real. We are required to incorporate these mathematical principles into the programming of orbital satellites. The satellites comprising the global positioning system are traveling at considerable speeds. Therefore, the progression of time for those satellites differs from the progression of time for you on the ground. We are compelled to make systematic adjustments to their onboard clocks. If we neglected to perform these relativistic corrections, the location data provided by your GPS device would become inaccurate by several miles within a single day. There exists another dimension of time that consistently misleads our intuition, and it connects back to that earlier discussion regarding the challenge of mental counting. This is the concept of pattern recognition. Our perception includes a sense that time possesses a direction, an inherent arrow. The past appears fixed and unchangeable, while the future seems open and undetermined. You possess the ability to recall the meal you had this morning, yet you cannot similarly recall the meal you will have this evening. Why does this asymmetry exist? If the fundamental equations of physics operate identically whether run forward or backward in time, and the vast majority of them do, then what prevents us from possessing memories of future events? If you record a video of a planet orbiting its star and subsequently play that recording in reverse, the motion appears perfectly natural. It continues to comply with all the laws governing gravitational interaction. However, if you record a video of an egg falling onto a hard floor and shattering, and then play that recording backward, any observer immediately recognizes it as inauthentic. The liquid yolk does not spontaneously gather itself from the floor, reform into a spherical shape, and become re-encased within a perfectly assembled shell. Here lies the fundamental explanation. This phenomenon is not fundamentally about time itself. It is a matter of probability. It is a matter of disorder or entropy. It is exponentially easier to shatter an egg than it is to construct one. There exist countless configurations for a broken egg. Fragments scattered across the floor here, yolk splattered over there, the shell broken into 3 large pieces or 1,000 tiny shards. However, there exists only one highly specific arrangement where the egg exists in its complete intact state. Consequently, as objects and particles interact and move, they naturally tend to transition from an organized state, which offers few possible configurations, to a disorganized state, which offers vastly more configurations. We assign the term entropy to this principle. And this principle stands as the singular reason you perceive an arrow directing time. You are observing the universe as it shuffles its metaphorical deck of cards. The process began with a perfectly ordered deck, and with each passing second, the universe simply shuffles that deck a bit more thoroughly. It is impossible to unshuffle a deck merely through hopeful wishing. This implies that your subjective sensation of time flowing is actually your brain's method of registering the ongoing increase of disorder, of randomness within the cosmos. You are functioning as a detector of disorder. Whenever you mentally distinguish the past from the future, you are essentially distinguishing between a state of lesser randomness and a state of greater randomness. If the universe were ever to achieve a state of maximum possible disorder, maximum entropy, wherein all matter and energy were uniformly distributed and nothing of interest could occur, your brain would lose the capacity to differentiate past from future. There would be no intact egg available to be broken. There would be no memories capable of forming. Within a universe at thermal equilibrium, the directional arrow of time would simply vanish from existence. Therefore, let us return our focus to those individuals engaged in the mental counting exercise. Those who perceive the internal measuring tape versus those who perceive the internal speaking voice. Both groups are engaged in a struggle to enforce a rigid, linear framework upon a universe that is, in actuality, considerably more adaptable and complex than that framework allows. We construct these internal mental models, these internal counting mechanisms, because they are essential for our survival as biological organisms. We possess the innate need to anticipate the arrival of a predator or to recognize when a crop is ready for harvest. Our evolutionary path equipped us with the ability to track durations, but it did not equip us with the capacity to truly comprehend the fundamental nature of the dimension of time. Our brains are optimized for efficiency, not for absolute accuracy. Our conscious awareness prioritizes the present moment, the now, because that is the arena in which we exist and act. However, within the framework of physics, the concept of now proves to be exceptionally elusive. If you and I are standing in close proximity, our respective definitions of now are effectively identical. However, if you were situated on a planet located 1,000,000 light-years distant and you began to walk away from my location, your personal definition of now would intersect the fabric of the universe at a different angle compared to mine. The set of events you would classify as happening right now could potentially belong to what I would consider my future. Conversely, the set of events I consider to be happening right now could potentially lie in your past. There exists no single universal now that blankets the entire cosmos uniformly like a bedsheet. The universe is better conceptualized as a static block composed of all events, analogous to a four-dimensional loaf of bread. The manner in which you choose to slice that loaf depends entirely upon your current state of motion. This concept is challenging to internalize. It contradicts deeply held intuition. It carries the same unsettling quality as being told that the direction up is actually down. This difficulty arises because you are attempting to translate the sophisticated, abstract language of the universe into the crude, biologically rooted language of your own sensory apparatus. You are trying to apply a method suitable for counting socks to a situation that demands the measurement of light beams. When you attempt to force the cosmos to conform to the limitations of your intuition, the result is confusion. You generate logical paradoxes. However, the moment you release your preconceived notions about the nature of time, the moment you cease trying to quantify it like a load of laundry and begin measuring it as a dimension akin to space, suddenly the mathematical equations achieve coherence. Suddenly, the behavior of the universe becomes comprehensible. Our exploration remains incomplete because even after accepting the model of time as a dimension capable of being stretched and compressed by motion and gravity, a more profound question awaits us at the very foundation of existence. We have addressed the methodology of measuring time. We have addressed the arrow pointing toward increasing disorder. However, we have not yet addressed the subject of the origin, the beginning. If time is fundamentally a measure of change, what are the implications when you attempt to run the cosmic film backward until you reach its very first frame? Given that the universe is currently in a state of expansion, if we mathematically rewind this expansion, the universe would become progressively smaller and progressively hotter as we go back. Eventually, our rewinding reaches a point where the established laws of physics themselves begin to break down, to melt under the extreme conditions. Consider this: all of our clocks, our atoms, our planets, our beams of light, all of these things exist internally, within the volume of the universe. However, if the universe itself originated at a specific moment which we designate as the Big Bang, does the question, what events occurred before that moment, even possess logical meaning? This question represents the ultimate test for your newly refined definition of time. If time is merely a system for ordering events that occur inside the universe, then inquiring about events that transpired before the universe existed might be just as nonsensical as asking what geographical feature lies to the north of the Earth's North Pole. The question sounds grammatically valid, it forms a proper sentence. However, from a geometrical or physical standpoint, the question is pure gibberish. There is no north once you have arrived at the North Pole. In the same way, there may have been no time before the instant when time itself began. And yet, despite this logical conclusion, that persistent, nagging feeling remains. That internal counter keeps whispering. That internal voice keeps counting. 1, 2, 3. We possess a deep-seated, almost desperate desire for the universe to have an extensive backstory. We yearn for a timeline that extends infinitely backward into the past. It proves exceptionally difficult to accept the proposition that the measuring tape might simply begin at a certain point, that the internal counting machine possessed an on switch that was activated at a specific moment. This realization generates a fundamental friction between our human psychology and the revelations of modern cosmology. We exist as finite, limited beings, attempting to comprehend concepts of infinity using analytical tools constructed from biological tissue and electrochemical signals. It is, in itself, remarkable that we have managed to understand anything at all about the cosmos. Consider once more the concept of differing pattern recognition systems. The individual who perceives the internal measuring tape possesses the ability to count while simultaneously reading, because they are engaging distinct neural pathways, the visual system versus the verbal system. The progression of physics mirrors this phenomenon. Classical mechanics can be compared to the verbal counting method. It functioned adequately for describing everyday, macroscopic phenomena. The theory of relativity represents the visual measuring tape. It provides us with the capability to process and understand complex patterns that the older classical framework was incapable of handling. Humanity is engaged in a continuous process of upgrading its mental software in an effort to more accurately reflect the underlying hardware of physical reality. And this process of upgrading is invariably painful. It necessitates the discarding of cherished ideas and intuitive models, such as the comforting image of time as a flowing river. However, there exists a beautiful aspect to this entire endeavor. Despite the fact that your intuitive understanding is fundamentally incorrect, despite the fact that your internal chronometer is a biological workaround, and despite the fact that time is actually a flexible, relative, malleable dimension rather than a rigid, universal metronome, this flawed model still functions adequately for your daily existence. You retain the ability to boil an egg to your preferred consistency. You retain the ability to schedule and keep an appointment with a friend for coffee at 2 in the afternoon. The bizarre implications of relativity remain concealed beneath the hood of everyday experience, invisible during routine operation. You do not need a comprehensive understanding of internal combustion engine mechanics in order to successfully operate an automobile. In the same manner, you do not need to comprehend the complexities of spacetime metrics in order to successfully navigate your daily life. However, consider this: is it not preferable to possess that deeper knowledge? Is it not preferable to be aware that the intricate engine is indeed present and operational beneath the surface? This consideration returns us to that unusual experiment involving mental counting. Recall the distinction between the individual who internally hears numerical sounds and the individual who internally sees numerical symbols. This distinction is far more significant than a mere curiosity for social gatherings. It exposes a deeply unsettling gap inherent in our collective efforts to comprehend the cosmos. When two individuals engage in conversation regarding a complex topic, whether it be the nature of time, the principles of relativity, or the experience of love, they operate under the assumption that they are communicating using a shared language. They nod in agreement with one another. They voice their concurrence. They state, "I understand your point." However, what is the actual process occurring beneath the surface? Each participant is executing a massive, invisible system of translation. You take the stream of words I produce and convert them into your own unique, private internal imagery, a representational system which might bear no resemblance whatsoever to my own internal imagery. I utter the phrase 1 minute, and my internal experience is the visual image of a clock face. You hear the same phrase, and your internal experience is the auditory sensation of a voice speaking the words 60 seconds. We both arrive at the same conclusion regarding the duration. Consequently, we believe we have achieved mutual understanding. However, the internal machinery that produced that agreement in each of us is fundamentally alien to the other. This observation holds significant importance for the field of physics because it exposes the inherent fragility of what we term common sense. Common sense can be accurately described as merely the collection of ingrained prejudices and assumptions that an individual has accumulated by approximately 18 years of age. This collection is constructed upon the foundation of your specific personal internal imagery. If your mental representation of time consists of a tape measure marked with sequential numbers, you will likely encounter difficulty when trying to comprehend how time can undergo bending and distortion. If your mental representation is an internal voice performing a count, you will likely struggle to grasp how time can possess properties analogous to a spatial dimension. When educators attempt to convey concepts such as the quantum vacuum or the curvature of spacetime, they are not simply presenting you with novel information to be added to your existing knowledge base. They are, in effect, requesting that you delete and replace your fundamental operating system. They are asking you to discard the internal measuring tape and to silence the internal voice. This is precisely why the process feels so arduous. This is the reason your cognitive apparatus instinctively rejects these concepts. You are not merely engaged in learning new facts. You are engaged in a translation process that actively works against the ingrained grain of your own biological makeup.